Okay, so we're going to continue with our lesson on database management. We talked about we did basic information like introduction about databases, and then we looked at the data types, and we see that the data types they're similar to data types, say in JavaScript or some other programming language, but there are some differences with them. Uh, so that's what we looked at in the last lesson. This lesson here, we're going to start looking at the CRUD method because we talked about CRUD. What does that mean? Okay. So we're going to explore that right now. So let me get these slides up for you so you can follow along. Also, if you like these videos, you enjoy them, like, comment, share, subscribe. What else? Hit the bell. Hit the bell. I don't know what the bell does, but hit it. Okay, yeah, do that. Hit the bell. Um, anyways, all right, here we go. So let's talk about CRUD. Database managers like to refer to the architecture and maintenance of a database as the CRUD method. CRUD stands for create, retrieve, update, and delete. Those are the basics. If you can do that, you're in a good place. All right. There's a whole lot more. Whole lot more. A lot of things that SQL can do, or that you can do in MySQL rather. But if you can understand and you can have if you have a good grasp of how to create a database, how to retrieve data, update data, and delete data, then you are in a good place. So CRUD method, that's what we're going to be looking at right now. And here we go. Let's start off with create. Create involves setting up your schema. Basically, it is how the database is built. What we're going to do is we're going to build an album database because you all know that I love music. You see right here, my shirt says music makes me high. That's true. So I say no to drugs and I say yes to music. Um, that's also why um, I don't look my age because I keep toxins out of my body. All right, anyways, create involves setting up your schema. How we build the database. We're going to build this album database. You can choose whatever albums you want, but the schema will need to be the same for our lesson. Okay, so in other words, as we build out this schema, everybody needs to follow along with me with the schema, but you can put whatever albums that you want to. I'm not pushing my preferences on anybody. Uh, but we're gonna do the same thing as far as setting it up, our schema. So in the last lesson, we talked about two types of statements. We have schema statements and we have data statements. We'll use two files, and one would be a schema.sql file, and then we'll have a data.sql file. So this particular part of the lesson, we are going to be using Visual Studio Code. We'll also be using the MySQL server. So if you have not installed your MySQL, if you've not installed the MySQL server to your computer, this would be a good time to pause this video. YouTube, search for videos on YouTube about how to install MySQL on the particular computer that you have, and they'll guide you through that. And then come back to these videos. Okay, so we're all ready. So we're going to be using the MySQL server. We're going to be using Visual Studio Code with this lesson here, but it's simply a album database. That's what we're going to be doing. All right. So let's get into it. So here I have a list of, well, I have a data model here. Okay. And so we're going to build this out. Um, you don't have to necessarily build out this data model unless you just want to. Uh, it's a good idea. I always encourage my coders to start off with a data model when you're building a relational database, uh, because it helps you to organize your data. It helps you to structure it. And so this is the model that I have here. This isn't a perfect model or anything like that. I wouldn't say it's, perfect, but it has enough of what we need to be able to get the job done for this lesson. So as you can see here, we have an album table, and the fields we listed are album ID, title, artist ID, band ID, label ID, and year released. Then we also have an artist table, which has an artist ID, first name, last name. Then we have a band table, which has band ID and band. And we have a label table, which has label ID as well as label. And you see that we have, uh, if you look at the album table, if we look and see at the first entry, which is A Love Supreme, and has an artist ID of 2, which means this points down here to the artist table, John Coltrane, and band ID is null because John Coltrane is not found here in band. Label ID is 6, which means it points down here to the label Impulse. And I know my big head is in the way on the video, but we'll enter this data in. You can see the format of it is uh, has been normalized. So we'll build this out uh, to see what it looks like. All right, but we'll be referring back and forth to this data model here. All right. As you can see, the tables are already listed and the columns have headers. We just need to build it in SQL. We write everything in our schema.sql and data.sql file, and then we will transfer it to our MySQL server. So again, please make sure that you have installed a SQL server onto your laptop. So we use Visual Studio Code or this schema.sql and data.sql file, rather. We use that kind of like our worksheet. So we build it out there, write it out there, and as we write it, we migrate the code over to the MySQL server where the commands are being ran. All right. So let's right here. I'm going to pause right here. I'm going to open up Visual Studio Code, or you know what? Let's do this. We're going to create a folder in our lessons folder inside of our backend folder, and we're going to name this folder SQL. Okay. And I'm going to do it from my command line. You could do it however you want to, but inside of your backend folder, create a folder called SQL. So I'm going to say, so here, if I'm doing it from my terminal, let me see what path I'm in. Okay. So I need to get to my desktop. We'll say CD desktop. And then from there, I need to go to my MSCA folder. From there, my lessons folder. And from there, back end. Bam, there I am. And then from this back end folder, inside of there, I need to make a folder that I'm going to call. This folder DB, or I'll call it SQL rather. So make there SQL. Although I should call it DB, I'm gonna leave it SQL. So make there SQL, and then I'm gonna go into my SQL folder. So CD SQL, and from right in here, this is where I'm gonna make my album DB folder. So this is where this project is going to sit, because I want to have other SQL projects. So they'll all go into my SQL folder. So the name of this one is going to be album DB. And I'm going to put a year by it. Album DB 25. Oh, I didn't say what to do with it. I need to say make dir album DB, and I'll put an underscore album DB underscore 25. I'll just do it like that. So album underscore DB underscore 25. Hit enter. Now I want to go into that folder. So it's CD album underscore DB underscore 25, because CD again stands for change directory, and that's what I'm doing. I'm changing my directory. Now that I'm in album underscore DB underscore 25, now I need to create my files. So the two files I'm going to have again is schema.sql and data.sql. So I'm going to say touch schema.sql and then space data.sql. And that creates those two files inside of my album DB25 directory. And if you have it configured on your terminal or Git Bash, you can open up Visual Studio Code straight from there, like I'm doing right now. That's code dot, and then there we go. It opens up MySQL inside of that path. Cool, right on. Okay, so I got that open. Let me create another tab over here. I need to give me 1 second. Let me just set that up. All right, cool. All right, so you should have Visual Studio Code or whatever your IDE is that you're using. You should have that open, and you see I have a data.sql file. Let me close that up, and I have a schema.sql file as well. Now, depending on some extensions that you have, you can run MySQL straight from your VS Code. If you want to do that, I'm not going to do that. I like to do it in the way that I do it so that you can see exactly what's happening. A lot of people like to teach shortcuts. That is not my method. I like to teach you the long route so that you'll be able to know where you are and how to fix things. All right. So, anyways, we got those two files open up, and we're ready now. So we're going to be toggling between the SQL files and the MySQL server. Okay, so again, what we're going to do is we're going to write the code inside of our SQL files in our IDE, and then we'll move it over once it's done to our MySQL server. So let's start in our schema.sql file. The very first thing we want to do is we want to drop any database of the name we give if it exists within the server. In other words, we were checking to make sure that in our database we don't have any database that exists of this same name. Then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create the database that we want to make. And then lastly, we want to use it. So drop database if it exists, create database, and then use. It's very simple. So I'm going to come back over here, make sure that I'm in my schema file. Okay. Me personally, for styling, I like to write my SQL commands in all caps. I don't think that you have to, but I definitely do it because it helps me to understand, what my commands are, and then what is the text that I'm writing. So I'm going to drop database if exists, and we're naming this my album DB. So my album DB. I put the DB in all caps, and then I'm going to put a semicolon. If you've been following my lessons, and I hope that you have because you like the way I present the material and everything, I'm so cool like that. In the JavaScript lesson, I put up a slide saying how I am team no semicolon when it comes to JavaScript. I just don't like to use them. There's no rhyme or reason behind it. I just don't like to. Uh, in MySQL or in SQL, you must have a semicolon. Semicolon ends each command. So if you weren't using semicolons before when it comes to JavaScript, even though I encourage you to do it, now's the time that you have to be using it. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So here it said drop database if exists, my album DB, and then I want to create a database by the same name, my album DB, semicolon, and then use my album DB. We're going to drop the database if it exists. If there's a my album DB already on my device in my server, I'm going to drop it. In other words, delete it, remove it, kill it, eliminate it. And then we're going to create a database of that same name. And then we're going to use that database. So these are the first three steps whenever you want to create a database. All right. So now that I have that up, I'm gonna leave that there for right now. Now what I want to do, I'm back over here in my terminal. I want to I want to start my MySQL server. Okay. And to start the MySQL server, and I believe I have it here. Let's see. Oh, here, I mentioned it right here. Semicolon. Notice that like JavaScript, each statement ends with a semicolon. However, unlike JavaScript, you must end each statement with a semicolon. The statement will not be read correctly, and you could potentially corrupt your schema as well as your data. So I had to emphasize that semicolons must use. All right. After you type this in your schema file, we'll need to copy it and paste it in our MySQL server. To get our MySQL server, to get into it, open your command line. So your git bash terminal, whatever. And we're going to type MySQL -u root -p. Then hit enter. It's going to ask you for your password. Type the password you use for your MySQL server and then hit enter. So here I am. I'm going to say MySQL -u root -p. I hit enter. It asked me for my password. I type my password in and then hit enter. And now it starts my server up. So before we paste these lines in there, before we copy and paste it, let's look at a couple things. All right. So here in my MySQL server, if I want to look at the databases that I already have inside of my server, if I want to look at them, I will type show and then databases and then semicolon. And again, for me, I could do a lowercase like so, but I like to capitalize. So I'll say show databases, semicolon, hit enter. And these are after I've installed MySQL, these are some pre-built databases that are already listed. But the command is show databases, semicolon, and that will pull up any databases that you may have. All right. So you may not have the same as I do, especially if you have, and this is a new device. I haven't built any databases on this particular machine, but the one I had previously, I had a whole bunch of databases. So anyways, so show databases, that is one command. Now we're ready to execute this here. So if we come back over here to our IDE, I'm going to copy those 3 lines of code. Check your spelling. And I'm going to come back over here into my MySQL server and paste it. And when I do that, notice here, drop database if exists, my album DB, query okay, 0 rows affected, 1 warning. create database, my album DB, query OK, one row affected, and then use my album DB. I'm going to hit enter. Database changed. So now I'm in my album DB. Again, I can come over here and if I say show databases, now I can see my album DB. I have successfully created that database and added it here. So I've done it successfully. Now we have a database inside of our MySQL server. It's that simple. We've created an entire database with 3 lines of code. Now we can begin to build our tables. Back in the model, the data model, we have 4 tables: album, artist, band, and label. Let's go back and look at it. We have an album table, an artist table, a band table, and a label table. By looking at the data model, you might think that we should start with the album table. Like that's normally what we want to do because I have this one sitting up here at the top. I would think that this is the one I want to start with, but I would not want to start with this table. Anybody have an idea why I would not want to start with this table?
Because it's not the smallest one.
Not because it's not the smallest one.
The small ones first.
We do need to build the small ones first, but why would I need to build the small ones first? Correct. The larger this album table references artist, band, and label. We can see here we need information from artist, band, and table in order for this one to actually work. In other words, if I try to store this in, if I try to put this data in, say for a Love Supreme, it has no idea what 2 is for artist ID. It doesn't mean anything. And again, this is a relational database, so the tables need to relate. So I need to start off with these I guess subtables, if you will, to build those out before I build out my album table. So yes.
Okay, so we have to build these so it seems like we can't edit these. Like we are putting these in here and sending them.
Oh, we can edit it. We will. Yeah, we'll edit. We'll see how. Yeah, but we can't. Yes, we're building out the structure for the table. Again, the schema for our database. Before we put any data in there, we build out the schema, how we want the tables to look, how we want them to relate to each other, all that. A good question. So you can see that there are 3 columns: artist ID, band ID, label ID, that need information from another table, what we just mentioned. We'll explain in more detail later, but for now, let's start with the artist table. So the first table we're going to build is the artist table. The create clause does just that. We can create a database with it or create a table. So to create our artist table, we will write create table, and then the name of the table, which would be artist. So let's start there. Again, we're going to come back over here into Visual Studio Code. I'm going to say create table, and then the name of my table is artist. And open parentheses. You'll have some automatic text pop up, but disregard that and make sure that after this parentheses, you put a semicolon there. Okay. So create table artist. And now what goes inside is our fields, and then how we want these fields to be set up. Okay. So your first one is going to be artist ID. So let's type this in and then we'll talk about it later. So artist underscore ID. And then I'm going to put small int, unsigned, and then I think auto increment, auto underscore increment, and not null, and then put a comma. Next is f name varchar 40, l name. I don't know. I'm not even worried about that because it's not going to affect what I'm doing. No, go away. L name varchar 40, and then I'm going to type this in right here. We'll talk about this constraint, and then pk underscore artist, and then that's going to be primary key, open parentheses, and then put space there. Artist underscore ID. Now you may get a bunch of squiggly lines with this. It's not going to affect anything inside of your MySQL server. So just, for the most part, disregard it. But you do want to check, monitor, check your spelling and whatnot. But for the most part, it's okay. You'll know if it's not okay when we try to run it inside the server. All right, so we're creating a table. And so how do we create a table? Let me put a comment. Let's see, create a table. So we use a create table command, and then whatever the table name is, open parentheses. We put our field, and then we'll put in, I don't know what I call it. I guess maybe the constraints. Okay, that's how we'll look, and then they are comma separated. And that's what we have here. We have create table artist. That's the name of our table. The first field is artist underscore ID. The data type, we put that next. Small int, that's what we're going to use. And we want to make sure that it's unsigned because we don't want any negative values to be an ID. So unsigned, which means it's going to start at 0 and go to 65,000, was it 535? And then we want to set auto increment for our artist ID. So in other words, each time that we create a new artist, it's automatically going to increment and add to the ID. So it's going to increment without us having to put manually store an ID for the artist ID. And then we have not null, which simply means that this field cannot be null. All right. Next we have f name varchar, and we talked about the data type. So this is just saying first name varchar of 40 characters. Same thing with l name varchar 40 characters. And then lastly, what we're doing is we are writing a constraint on this table. And the constraint on this table, pk underscore artist, primary key artist ID, what it's doing, it is specifying or saying that the artist ID is our primary key, and we are naming it pk underscore artist. So again, each table is going to have a primary key that makes each field unique. It makes each field unique. So we have to specify which key is our primary key. And in most cases, especially for the ones we're doing on this lesson, is going to be the ID of whatever the table is. That's just the easy thing to do. You may want to have it different, I don't know. Maybe if you're doing, you know, um, a bunch of users and you have like their social security number, if you have to have that for whatever reason, um, or if you want to do, some other way of identifying or uniquely identifying each entry, you could set that to be your primary key. But for the purpose of this, uh, whatever the ID of the table is, that's going to be our primary key. So let me I'm going to add table constraint right here inside my comment. This is how our tables are going to look. I'll say table constraints because there may be more than one. All right. So here I have this is a table. Okay. Here we go. Again, create table. Artist creates a table and assigns it the name artist. Artist ID. Our first column is name artist ID. We specify that the data type is small int and unsigned. So again, the values go from 0 to 65,535. Auto increment means that the values will increment automatically with the creation of each row. And not null means that this field cannot be null. F name. The column's first and last name receives the data type varchar with up to 40 characters. And then constraint PKR's primary key. The table needs a unique identifier. We add a constraint to the table that specifies that the artist ID field will be the primary key and will be named PK artist. All right. Now let's copy this statement here and move it over to our MySQL server. And so you want to check it before you hit enter, before you go and do anything. Notice here, whenever you hit enter or whenever you have a new line in MySQL rather, or in the server, we can see the arrows pop up and just indicates that this is a new line. All right. Once I do that, I'm going to hit enter. And if your spelling and everything was okay, your punctuation was okay, then you'll see query okay, 0 rows affected. If not, if you get some kind of error, it'll tell you what the error is. MySQL errors are, I like some of them, other ones not so much. But you have to read the error and fix it. Okay. And if everything works okay, now you can build out the band and label tables. So I'll give you time to do that. They're going to look essentially the exact same way. You can refer to the data model that we have here. So you can, like, if you need to, just go and pause it, get the information and then build out the band and label tables. And then after that, we'll build the album table. We'll do that on another video. So here's a good place to pause, get your band and label tables done, and then we'll come back in the next video and work on the album table.